everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today we're gonna start the lesson French Revolution. So, uh, why did I put this picture as the first page of this lesson? Why? Because this is the first thing which comes into my mind when I think of this lesson, as this is one of the significant moments of the French Revolution. It's in fact it's the starting moment of the French Revolution. It's the storming of the Bastille. Then, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And when did this happen? He is King Louis, the King of France. When he was coronated, the royal treasury was literally empty. And he was supposed to maintain the vast court of the Palace of Versailles and then maintain the huge army and then, he was also helping the 13 American colonies gain their independence from their common enemy, Britain. So, when he was helping them, he lent a lot of money to them. And when the 13 American colonies gained independence from Britain, they did not return the money. So, their debt went into around 3 million livres. So, it was devastated, right? France had no money at that time. This is what exactly happened. So there was economical crisis in France. And then France was divided into estates in 1789. It was also known as the Olden Regime. So the first estate was the clergy. The clergy consisted of the special functions in the church. They had a lot of land, wealth, and they had so many privileges when they were born itself. They had the exemption from paying all the taxes. The church levied a tax called the teeth. Okay, it was only extracted by the peasants of the third estate. Now I'll explain that in later. Then we have the second estate consisting of the nobility. They were rich aristocrat people and they were also exempted from paying the tax. So then, who's paying the tax? Who's the left out person? The third estate, the commoners, peasants and artisans. They were the ones who were paying the taxes, all the taxes, the common tax, like the tail and the teeth, everything. The second and the first estate, they were just careless. They never used to pay taxes. They were just, enjoying their lives all the time. The third estate worked a lot and they just used to pay the taxes. They didn't even have the money to buy themselves food and eat. They consisted of the peasants and the artisans. So this is the National Assembly and I'll be talking about it in a short while. So let's continue about it. So what were the causes of the French Revolution? How did it start and why are the causes? What are the causes? So this is one of the causes. I'll tell you what that is. It's the struggle to survive, the subsistence crisis, one of the main causes which led to the French Revolution. So, what happened was in the winter, there was a really bad harvest in France, and which led to scarcity of grain. This was in between the year 1715 to 1789. Why such a long period? It was because it just continued. There was nobody to help them. So it led to scarcity of grain, and due to the scarcity of grain, the shopkeepers used to hoard the supplies or they used to increase the food prices, and people could no longer get food. The rich people, of course, used to get a lot of food. Then the peasants could no longer afford the food, they couldn't even afford bread. That was their basic food. Then there were food riots, then there were weaker bodies, people became weak, and there were just a lot of diseases spreading, and then at the end, people started dying. So, this is what exactly was the subsistence crisis. Many people died in this. Then there was another thing. They were just paying taxes and taxes and taxes. They were not getting anything in return, not even good facilities, right? This was another factor. I explained it previously. Then the middle class, the growing middle class. So, overseas trade and manufacturing good, these people became rich. They were only, small section of the third estate. But the rest of the third estate still suffered, and these were a little well off family, so they could pay. So these are the philosophers I'm going to talk about. This is the first philosopher who was preaching his ideas so that he could help the third estate, come into a better position. His name is John Locke. In his book, The Two Treatises of the Government, he criticized the doctrine of the divine and the absolute right of the monarch. So, what does it mean? He did not want the king to have all the powers in his hands. He wanted everybody to have, specific rights so that nobody was living in poverty. Next, we have Rousseau, who, in his book, he wrote The Social Contract. The form of government which which was based on the social contract between the people and their representatives. So in this system, it's basically democracy in a way. Like in India, we're following, all the citizens are voting their representatives, and the representatives had the power because they were voted by the people. So this is what he wanted to say. So this is what he wrote in his book, The Social Contract. Then we have Montesquieu. In his book, Spirit of Laws, he proposed the concept of separation of powers. Like what we have in India, our government is divided into three groups: legislature, executive, and judiciary. This is what exactly he proposed. This was also the model formed, used by the government in the 13 American colonies, which they itself helped gain independence. These ideas were often discussed in salons or coffee shops or, public places where people who could read used to read the newspapers out, these ideas out, because most of the people in France at that time were illiterate. They didn't know how to read, they could only understand. So it was read out so that the people could easily understand. Then, finally, the Estates General. The final cause why the outbreak of the revolution started. Why did the revolution start? It starts, this is the last point. The Estates General. So basically, King Louis found himself in a situation where there was no money, there was nothing in the treasury, and he had to maintain so many stuff. So he thought, why don't I, start a new taxation system? So he thought, fine, let me call upon this meeting, which consisted of all the representatives from all the three estates, the first, second, and the third. Now, the representatives were, that means not everybody from the three estates, only representatives, just like we vote for our representatives in the government, these were also representatives. So, the first and second estate representatives were made to sit in rows facing each other. And what about the third estate? They were made to stand at the back. This was a really huge disrespect for them. On top of that, many of the representatives weren't allowed to come into the Estates General. Why? Because they were peasants and artisans. Many women were also not allowed to come. Then, that's the reason their letters of grievance were listed in around 4,000 to 5,000 letters, and they were brought into the meeting hall by the representatives. Then what else happened was the representatives of the third estate suggested a new method of voting. What was this? Usually in the Estates General, the method of voting was that each estate as a whole would get one vote. So what did the third estate suggest? Each member or each representative of each estate get one vote each of each value. However, the king said, no, I do not want this voting system. That's the reason, as a mark of protest, all the third estate members, representatives, they left this Estates General to form the National Assembly in the indoor tennis court in the Palace of Versailles. They locked themselves in and they swore not to leave the court until they formed the constitution for France. This is what exactly happened. You can see everybody is like pledging to not leave the court and swearing to make France National Assembly and all. Who were they guided by? Mirabeau and Abu Seyes. And what else exactly happened? Now this is the National Assembly, right? Then what exactly happened was then randomly rumors spread in France, in Paris especially, that the king had ordered troops to come into the city and fire open on them. Now, nobody exactly knows if this actually was said by the king or it was just a rumor. But people, of course, took it as a rumor, and this is what exactly happened. They went, gathered in front of the town square, the town hall. They formed the People's Militia or the People's Army or something like that, and then they stormed to the prison fortress, the Bastille, which stood for the despotic power of the King Louis. And they went and they just stormed, killing the commander of the Bastille, releasing the prisoners, although there were only 7 prisoners, and they just destroyed it bit by bit. And then, after destroying it, what they did was they sold its stone fragments in the market as, to people who wanted to keep a souvenir of it, to enjoy that, oh, I've destroyed the Bastille. And later, what exactly happened was, after the revolt, France became a constitutional monarchy because the National Assembly was successful to draft the constitution for France. And then all the powers were separated into institutions: legislative, executive, and the judiciary. And the powers were divided. That means the king's powers were now divided into 3 forms. Then the constitution granted the power to make laws in the National Assembly. Then the National Assembly gave a new system instead of monarchy. What they suggested were men who were above 25 age and who paid taxes equal to 3 days of laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens, and rest were passive. Not even women were considered in the active citizens. Then France finally was able to abolish monarchy and became a republic. Then what? He is the person. He is none other than Maximilian Robespierre. He formed one of the governments called the Jacobin government, and then they came into power. What is the Jacobins? They are a club. So they were named after the Saint Jacob in Paris, and what did they do? They just did government policies and political clubs and everything, and he was the leader. Then, when they came into power, when the National Assembly fell, or whatever you want to say, they came into power, and then the reign of terror started. This is the Jacobin assembly or the government. This is how it, it's one of the pictures, that's all. And why was it called the reign of terror? Because there was a system called the guillotine, and Maximilian Robespierre was a very, strict person, I would say. He wanted to murder or kill every single person he thought influence, effect on he thought whoever was in a danger, or they were against his policies, he thought they had to be executed first of all. And this is the machine guillotine, where it used to chop off the head of the person. So they were just used to lie over there, and then the head used to go off somewhere. This was the guillotine, and this is the reason it was also known as the reign of terror. So then also he introduced another system where, instead of calling everybody, the sir, like monsieur and then madame, instead the Frenchmen and women were called the citoyen and citoyenne. So they were just called citizen, nothing else, no special status. So if anybody was heard calling themselves madame or monsieur, then that's all, guillotine. They were all killed. The churches were shut down and their buildings were converted into offices. So he was determined to kill every single person who he found somebody against his ideas. And he wanted to follow his policies in such a manner that he even killed his own supporters. So finally, at the end, he was convicted by the court and guillotined. He himself was guillotined at the end. Then Directory rules France. This is also a guillotine. And this is also a women's revolution. revolution did happen, women were involved because they were not allowed to vote and all, that is separate. These people also had their revolution. Not only men were part of the revolution, right? They worked as flower sellers, seamstresses, they sold fruits, vegetables, etc., etc. So they weren't usually educated. Only the rich people's daughters were educated, and after that they were married off. So they only had to cook and fetch water, stand in queues for bread. They had to look after everybody and all of that. All of these tasks were left on them. And they weren't usually allowed to form their political clubs and all, but they did manage to form. There were many famous women who were part of the French Revolution, but I'm not going to talk about them because it's not part of our portion also. Then we have the directory rules France. Why did a directory come into the picture now? It's because the legislative and the executive of the National Assembly, they started, having clashes. After the Jacobin regime fell, the National Assembly again came into power, and the executive and the legislative, they had fights, conflicts. So it was unstable. Then Napoleon Bonaparte comes into picture, and he's like, I'll conquer France and everything. And then he just came, he took advantage of the political instability, and then he became a military director. In spite of all these changes, the ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity still stayed in France, and people often actually saw him as a moderator, a changer of France, and all of that. Later on, people actually realized he was trying to conquer everything. Okay, he was going on invading everybody's, France, England, and all of that. And that's what exactly he did. And after that, he was what can I say, he was defeated finally in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. This is when he fell. Napoleon was no longer the ruler of France. Then finally we have the abolition of slavery. Why am I talking about it at the end? Though the abolition of slavery was even introduced in the Jacobin regime, it was further again reintroduced in his regime, the Napoleon regime. So basically, what exactly happened was there were a lot of plantation owners at that time, and they employed a lot of slaves brought in from Africa and this Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo. So there was a triangular slave trade, and all the slaves were, brought from all those places to France so that they could be employed in the plantation places to do the work. Later, when the Jacobin regime, basically Maximilian Robespierre, came into power, he said, let's abolish slavery. After that, after a long time, after when Napoleon came into power, it was again reintroduced. So the slavery was again normal for France at that time. But however, when Napoleon fell again, he was defeated. Again, it got abolished, and they said everybody is equal. There's not supposed to be any slavery and all. The plantation owners also understood, and they let go of their slavery. And finally, the ideas of liberty, all the democratic rights, the French Revolution's legacy, everything still continued. It spread all through the world, and in fact, people of India, such as Tipu Sultan, also were inspired by the ideas of the French Revolution, and they even tried to implement a few ideas, you can say that, because a few ideas like liberty, fraternity, and equality, these three qualities are also in the Indian constitution. So we can actually understand how important the French Revolution was. So thank you for watching my video. This is the end of the lesson French Revolution. Thank you so much.